This is Gamer Weekly, bringing you the latest of what the video game scene has to offer. On today's show, I have Mark Ogilvie of Jagex Games, and we're going to be talking about RuneScape, the history of RuneScape, and the current state of MMORPGs. All right, and welcome to the third episode of Gamer Weekly, the show that is about games on a weekly basis, because, it's kind of in the name. So with me today is Mark Ogilvie from Jagex. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's crazy how long a game like RuneScape has gone on for. So how did RuneScape get started?
So originally the founders, they grew up on board games and tabletop role-playing games. And, that kind of adventure fantasy was a real kind of part of their being, really. And they started getting involved with graphical mods, which were kind of almost like text-based adventure games that you played with a bunch of different people at the same time. And they were interested in making a game similar to that, really, but giving it a graphical engine so you could actually see the world that you were exploring in, not just reading text. And make it playable by thousands of people at the same time. One of the really big, important things to us was about accessibility and, allowing people to play the game with a really low spec computer and, really low internet connectivity as well. A lot of people played RuneScape back in the day on sort of 28K modems. Because the game size is so small, that kind of accessibility meant that we could put the game out to lots of other people. And the opportunity for the founders, Andrew and Paul Gower, to kind of do that kind of traditional questy storytelling type experience as a game was just something they really, really wanted to do. So it was really a kind of a labour of love. It was never a kind of commercial exercise. It wasn't like two people saying, how can we make money? It was more about, hey, let's have some fun. Let's put a game out there that we really want to play. And it was just kind of fingers crossed. I wonder if other people will like this too. And they did.
Yeah, I was about to say, it definitely caught on. How many players play RuneScape now?
Well, so we've got way over kind of 600,000 subscribers. We've got loads and loads of... we have about 2 million unique visitors every month to the website. And we've had over 240 million accounts made in total. I think we just clocked over 245 million accounts that we've got playing the game right now.
Wow, that is insane.
So that's since 2001, 245 million accounts. And we play around with all sorts of funky stats. Like if RuneScape players were a population, they would be the 5th biggest population in the world. And I think it's something stupid like 12 times the size of Australia or something like that.
Jeez.
I know, it's crazy now. It is absolutely crazy when we think about those kind of numbers, Because ultimately, the game started off as a hobby, and just, like I say, just to kind of stab in the dark, I wonder if other people would like this. And yeah, it's the numbers of people is just crazy. I get stopped all the time, if I'm wearing a RuneScape hoodie or something like that, people have stopped me in the street and be like, oh my God, you work for the company, and stop me for an autograph or something like that. And that is weird, being some kind of crazy digital celebrity just because I happen to work on this funky little game.
So what were some of the obstacles that you guys faced making a game like RuneScape?
Well, I talked about that need for accessibility. Keeping everything really small so that people could download it really quickly is a real challenge because you've always got new developers that want to come up with new ideas and push the game engine to its limits and do interesting new things. And so there's always a kind of fight between developers wanting to do cool stuff and us also trying to temper that ambition to make sure it fitted into the kind of small download size that we had. And the other big problem, of course, is because it was small, because it at this incredibly small download size, the graphics were never like... They didn't really compete. I think about the graphics that we had in the early days and comparing that to the console games that I was playing, and it it was terrible. It really didn't compete in any way. So we had to make sure that our gameplay was, stand out really, and was different to other experiences that you could have online. And the other big challenge for us was keeping up with the demands of the players. In the early days, our success was not something that we were expecting. So actually the biggest problem we had was building servers fast enough and hiring enough staff to be able to deal with the amount of customer support queries that we were having. And obviously, like a lot of the foundations of RuneScape is this very kind of homemade indie feel. All of the tech that we used, all of the software that we used, all of it was homemade, built internally. We didn't take anything, off the peg and use it ourselves. Absolutely everything, the billing systems, customer support systems, the kind of map editing tools that the developers would use, the scripting language, everything was homemade. And so we're constantly building new things as we as a company realise that we need it. But interestingly for me, the biggest thing was being a business. Like, we were just a bunch of gamers having fun, making games for other people. But there's a business side behind that. You've got people who are paying you subscription, that they deserve a level of service. And, waking up and being aware of the requirements of being a business and the kind of responsibility that we had for our players. I think actually that was the kind of biggest obstacle that we ever really faced. That kind of mix of games and business. It's a weird thing, and even being in the business, like it's still something that we struggle with now.
So how do you guys come up with something new for RuneScape? I mean, it's been 15 years. Like, how do you find new ideas? Actually,
and I get asked this question a lot, and we don't actually struggle coming up with new ideas. Actually, what we struggle with is trying to work out what not to do. That I've got like a folder that I keep on my computer of all of the ideas that we've decided to ditch along the way. And I always say to my developers, the hardest thing about your job is knowing when to kill your babies. Now, I know that sounds really dramatic and harsh, but every little idea, every joy, every little seed that you come up with is like a little baby that you're nurturing, into existence. But you can't possibly make all the ideas that you come up with. So it's a real challenge to decide which ones to make. I never really think that we struggle to come up with ideas. And I think a lot of that is because of the creative freedom that we offer our developers and our players within the game. There's so much content. There's so many different quest lines, so many different environments, so many different sorts of gameplay within RuneScape. I mean, we've got like over 50 mini games that exist within RuneScape where most of them would stand absolutely perfectly fine as a game in their own right, as a mobile game or something like that. So there's so many different things that you can do all the time. There isn't really a lot of creativity that's out of, that's off limits for the things that you could explore in RuneScape. I always say to my developers, what I want is to make sure it's got a RuneScape-y feel. So you could pretty much put anything in there. We're a medieval fantasy game, but we started doing things to do with, going up into space and destroying creatures in space, which is very different from anything we'd ever done before. And I'm pretty sure we'll never do it again. But we did it in a very RuneScape-y way. I mean, you're not in a medieval fantasy world and build a rocket or anything crazy like that. So what we did was we strapped a monkey who was carrying a teleport rune to the back of a firework and shot him into space that then allowed the players to kind of teleport in after him. So we always do things in a kind of slightly comedic way, arguably a very British way. And that is the kind of, that's part of the thing that is RuneScape-y or RuneScape-iness, I suppose.
So was there an idea that you had before that didn't exactly pan out well with your audience?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of examples like that. It's very interesting in RuneScape because quite often you'll put things in the game and the players will use it in a way that you weren't really expecting. I mean, that's emergent gameplay, right? And in a big social experience like RuneScape, players are going to do things and come up with ideas that you never thought of in the first place. So it's quite often the case that there are elements of the game where we've put it in there and we think, actually, that's a bug. It's not supposed to work like that, but the players have kind of taken it and made it work for some other purpose in the game. I'm trying to think of some kind of nice examples of that, really. Let me think. Do you know, I can't. There's nothing which is coming to mind right now. I mean, there's the bigger things. There's things like Evolution of Combat, of course, which was this big combat update that we did to the game. And the reason why we did it was because the number one reason that players were coming up with for leaving the game was that they found the combat system was kind of boring. So we come up with this really cool, super swizz, all singing, all dancing, very graphical, new combat system. And a lot of our players said, actually, I didn't think there was anything wrong with the system that you had before. And whilst as designers, we might say, that's really good, it's really sexy, a lot of our players, and you've got to remember, these are players that have grown up with the game and played the same game for like 12, 13 years at that point in time. And even though from a design perspective, we're saying this is a really cool system, it's not what they wanted at all. And that was a real challenge for us.
So what made you guys want to separate, I guess, like the player base? Because you guys have the RuneScape Classic, and then you also have RuneScape 3 going on as well. Like, what made you guys want to do something like side-by-side like that?
It's a real kind of misconception, actually, right now, particularly in the press, that there's some kind of reason that we have for separating our community. That's very much not the case. What you've got to remember is that RuneScape has continued to grow, and it always does new, interesting things. And not everybody is going to like. It is impossible to come up with updates that every single member of your community is going to like. Like, I always talk about an update that we did years ago where we added more space to the bank. So it's just more space that people could store stuff. And we never in a million years thought, well, there'll be people that didn't like us doing that update. But actually, there was this tiny little piece in the game where you benefited from a gameplay perspective, from an efficiency perspective, if you had a full bank. So the fact that suddenly we'd given them more bank space, they were like, no, I don't want that. That's a terrible update. So I kind of learned from that experience, like, you can't ever come up with an update where everyone's going to be happy. So we year after year after year, we've got new updates, new things, new concepts, new skills, new monsters, whatever. And some players just didn't like the things that we were doing, whether that was like a new graphical interface or, microtransactions or whatever. There are different reasons why people didn't like the things that we did. And, our heyday, the point where we were the biggest we'd ever been, was back in 2007, 2008, that kind of period of time. And around that time, we made a massive change to the game that was all because of the threat of gold farmers and botting at the time. And we made some fundamental changes to gameplay, and people didn't like that. It changed the way that they fought each other in the wilderness. And even though we brought it back about 4 years later, the game had changed too much for those players. So we did a whole load of different things, and there was this kind of growing voice in our communities saying, do you know what, I'd really like to play a version of the game back in the old day. Like a version of the game, from sort of, that kind of glory day, the rose-tinted glasses of when everything was better, between sort of 2006, 2008. And we just happened to find an old save disk, a backup file from that date. And we're like, well, let's give it a go. We'll see if it works. We'll boot it up. We'll do it as an experiment and see if the players want to play it. And they did. And, this wasn't an attempt of us to split the community. This was more us listening to what our community wanted and us giving it to them.
What do you believe the future holds for MMORPGs?
The challenging thing for us is redefining what an MMO actually is. There's this current association with MMOs about an expenditure of time that, like, an MMO really isn't an MMO if you haven't got to invest 2 hours in it every day or something like that. And I don't believe that has to be the case. I think that is what MMOs have turned into, but that doesn't need to be the way that they are. I think looking at what an MMO might look like on a tablet, for example, is a really interesting thing, because a tablet gamer generally is only going to be playing for about 20 minutes or something like that. Average play sessions of a tablet gamer is tiny compared to average play sessions for a PC gamer. But there's so much baggage in the things that you do in an MMO, right? There's grind elements. You spend a lot of time ferrying items to your bank, or, there's just a lot of kind of housekeeping involved in an MMO experience. And I would kind of challenge that and say, well, what if you could take all those things away? What if you could really clean up that experience and really just work out what those really important things are to MMO gamers, and finding a different way to deliver those things. I think it's quite interesting right now that there's this kind of nod back to the old school way of doing MMOs, like whether that's ourselves and our old school servers, or a lot of the big shiny things that are coming out this year, are like reboots of Dark Age of Camelot, those kind of things, or Mr. Garriott and the kind of things that he's doing. A lot of that is kind of looking back at the way that MMOs were in the early days, rather than the way that they've tried to evolve in the last few years, and I think that's quite an interesting thing. I think it's also important to look at like the Chinese market. MMOs are really thriving and they're growing all the time, but they have a slightly different model of the way that they do things. And I think it's important for us to have watch what they're doing, because actually I think it's quite interesting, and is very much more of an old school way of looking at MMOs. I'm really interested in the way that gamification is kind of affecting the rest of the world, right? So there's so many businesses outside of games that look at the way that games motivate people through achievement systems and things like that, and they're applying them to completely different walks of life. There are elements of gaming and achievement systems and things like that in so many different walks of life right now. And I kind of like, people call MMOs like your second life, your other experience, your digital existence. I wonder actually if there's a blend there somewhere, that actually my real life and my digital persona somehow contribute to each other. So I'm kind of like, I'm making an MMO out of my life. Like, wouldn't it be weird if you leveled up when you paid your gas bill or something like that? Like, I think there's an opportunity for something like that. That's some crazy stuff, but I don't know. I feel like there's something there. Who knows? MMOs could grow in that way.
So what you're saying is that there's going to be gas bills that are going to be added to RuneScape?
No, I'm definitely not saying that. No. Believe me, I've fought against many people over the years who've wanted to put blatant bits of advertising in the game, and we're like, no, not interested in that. So no, you won't get RuneScape XP for paying your gas bill. Like, yeah, there you go. There's your headline right there.
So I actually do have one more question, and it's actually from a person that is super, or he was super into RuneScape. He recently retired.
Okay.
It is my brother, and he asked me a very, I don't really even know how to put it really. He asked me.
Go on.
He asked me.
Put it out.
He was like, well, I told him about the interview. I told him I was really excited, and he said, if you get the chance to talk to him, can you please ask them, can I have my 1 billion gold back? I lost it while staking, and it's plagued me ever since.
Well, he was gambling with it then, right?
Exactly. That's what I told him.
Right. Well, staking is what they say when they're betting an amount of gold pieces on the result of a battle. Like, it's against our terms and conditions to kind of give people their items that they've lost in that way. And, if he was a proper, decent RuneScape player, he'd make that bill back in no time.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
No worries. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this week's Gamer Weekly. This is Justin Banster signing off.